In the frozen wilderness of Norway's Isdal Valley, nature holds its breath. Jagged cliffs rise like black tea from the snow, and the forest sits silent, heavy with fog. This place is beautiful, yes, but it carries with it a reputation that few dare to speak of. For generations, locals have whispered about strange accidents, sudden deaths, and a feeling that the valley itself is cursed. It is known as Death Valley, a name earned not through myth alone, but through tragedy. On the morning of November 29th, 1970, this silence was broken. In the mist, where only the sound of boots crunching snow should be heard, two hikers stumbled upon something that would shake the foundations of Norway's peace and cast a shadow across Europe. They came upon smoke, faint, strange, lingering where no fire should have burned. As they approached, they saw her, or what was left of her. Among the sharp volcanic rocks lay the body of a woman. She was burned, her clothes charred, her skin blackened. Around her were scattered objects, bottles, clothing, half-melted possessions. It looked less like an accident and more like a ritual, a deliberate staging, a puzzle laid out for someone to solve. The hikers recoiled in horror. The smell of burned flesh lingered in the air. The woman was beyond recognition, her features erased by fire. Yet something about the scene felt off. There were no matches, no campfire. The burn marks were concentrated on her body alone. Who was she? How had she come to die here, in the Valley of Death? News of the discovery spread quickly. Police arrived. Reporters followed. And soon, the world would be introduced to one of the most mysterious figures in European history, a woman without a name, without a past, and without answers. They would call her the Isdal Woman. This is her story, a story of deception, of secrecy, and of a death that refuses to be explained. More than 50 years later, investigators, journalists, and ordinary people are still asking, who was she? Why was she here? And what or who silenced her forever? The discovery immediately drew the attention of local police in Bergen. The terrain was treacherous, steep slopes, icy rocks, a biting wind that seemed to claw at anyone who dared enter. Officers moved carefully, their breath rising in plumes of white as they carried their equipment toward the grim sight. Already, the unease of the place was weighing heavy on their shoulders. This was no ordinary accident. This was something else. Scattered around the woman's remains lay a haunting collection of objects. Half-melted plastic bottles that once held petrol. Fragments of clothing singed beyond recognition. A broken umbrella. Nearby, the faint outline of footprints, but no sign of who had left them. To seasoned investigators, the scene did not speak of misfortune. It whispered of intention. Among the debris, officers collected personal effects that raised even more questions. 2 bottles stood out, one that smelled strongly of paraffin, another of liquor. Nearby, a watch, a couple of earrings, and a fragment of a burnt note, almost illegible. There was no purse, no money, and, most telling of all, no form of identification. Whoever this woman was, she did not want to be found. The condition of the body shocked even the hardened investigators. The burns were severe, but strangely localized. Her front was charred, yet her back showed less damage. There was no evidence of a campfire. It seemed as if she had been doused in fuel and set alight in the open. But why here, in this isolated valley, far from the eyes of the world? The positioning of her body was odd as well. She was lying on her back, arms bent, hands clenched as if in pain. There were traces of bruising, suggesting she may have collapsed violently. Her legs were twisted at strange angles, inconsistent with a simple fall. And yet, no sign of a struggle around her. Whoever she was, her final moments had been cruel. As the fog thickened, speculation grew. Had this been suicide? Had the woman, unknown to all, walked into the valley, doused herself with fuel, and set herself ablaze? Or was someone else there? Someone who watched as she burned? Someone who ensured she would never leave alive? Both possibilities seemed unthinkable, yet one had to be true. Back in Bergen, the case file was opened. The entry read only, unidentified woman, found burned, Isdal Valley. But behind the dry language of official documents was a mystery unlike any the nation had ever faced. A puzzle was forming, one that would grow more complex with each new discovery. The question hung heavy in the air: who was the woman in the valley? And why had her life and death been staged so deliberately? The search for answers was only beginning. The woman's body was transported to the Haukeland University Hospital in Bergen. Forensic examiners, hardened by years of grim wake, braced themselves for what they were about to uncover. This was no ordinary autopsy. Beneath the burns, they hoped to find clues, a story hidden in flesh and bone. The burns were extensive, but not the cause of death. Inside her lungs, coroners found smoke particles, proof she was alive when the flames consumed her. But her stomach held something far more chilling, traces of sleeping pills. Dozens of them, enough to render anyone unconscious, possibly enough to kill. Her blood contained high levels of carbon monoxide, confirming she had inhaled smoke. Combined with the sedatives, it painted a disturbing picture. Either she had tried to end her own life in a desperate, agonizing act, or someone had staged it, ensuring she would never speak again. If it was suicide, why here, in the remote valley? Why under such gruesome circumstances? Few believed that explanation. The evidence hinted instead at someone who wanted her silenced and erased. Then came the first real clue: her teeth. The dental work was complex, featuring unusual fillings and techniques not common in Norway. In fact, some suggested it could have been done in Eastern Europe or the Far East. This was no ordinary tourist. She had traveled, perhaps widely. Experts would later say her dentistry was like a passport stamped in enamel, each filling a hint of where she had been. The Isdal Woman, as she was now called, had moved through worlds few could trace. The next discovery came at Bergen's railway station. Investigators found 2 suitcases, unclaimed, that had been left in a locker. Inside lay clothes, wigs, makeup, a notepad filled with cryptic codes, and once again, every identifying label had been carefully cut away. Whoever she was, she had gone to extraordinary lengths to erase her tracks. Among the items, detectives found fingerprints matching those taken from the burned body. There was no longer any doubt. The Isdal Woman had packed these bags. The question was, why so many disguises? Why so many false trails? The notepad contained a strange system of letters and numbers. At first glance, meaningless scribbles. But later, experts realized they corresponded to dates and travel destinations, a coded diary of her movements across Europe, a life lived in shadows, recorded in symbols. Her trail stretched across the continent, from Italy to Germany, from Paris to Oslo. She checked into hotels under at least 9 different names, always using false passports, always requesting rooms with balconies. Her movements were precise, deliberate, the work of someone trained to vanish. But still, no one could answer the most crucial question: who was she, and what mission had brought her to Norway in the freezing winter of 1970? For investigators, the case was no longer just about a death. It was about a life, one lived in deliberate secrecy, crossing borders and identities. And the deeper they dug, the stranger it became. As investigators dug deeper into the notepad's cryptic codes, a disturbing truth emerged. The Isdal Woman had not one life, but many. Each alias was a mask, each mask worn across different European cities. She checked into hotels as Genevieve Lancia, Claudia Nielsen, Vera Schlossnick. 9 names in total, spread across countries, none verifiable, all carefully constructed. These were not casual lies. They were systems of identity. Every alias came with its own passport, but curiously, no two stories aligned. She claimed to be Belgian, French, even South African. Languages spilled easily from her lips: German, French, broken English. Witnesses remembered her accent shifting as though she was changing clothes. Her movements mapped a continent. In the months before her death, she zigzagged across Europe with precision. She never stayed long, never left a clear trail, never revealed who she truly was. The map told a story of constant travel, of carefully timed arrivals and departures. The Isdal Woman wasn't a lost soul wandering Europe. She was on assignment. But whose assignment? Every step suggested intent. Every alias suggested preparation. Whoever she was, she had lived like a ghost, and ghosts are rarely innocent. Police combed the city for anyone who had seen her in her final days. And soon, stories surfaced, fragments of encounters, uneasy memories. Hotel staff remembered a striking woman, always well-dressed, sometimes with a wig, sometimes without. She carried herself with confidence, but rarely smiled. At times, she seemed on edge, scanning the lobby as though expecting someone to follow. One guest described her eyes as piercing, like she was measuring you, deciding if you were a threat. Another recalled how she dined alone, ordering expensive meals but speaking to no one. Stranger still, she spoke in multiple languages with ease, changing accents mid-conversation. In Bergen, she spoke fluent German. In another city, her French seemed native, who could move between tongues so effortlessly and less trained to. Witnesses reported seeing her in the company of unknown men. Some described them as foreign, others as military-looking. Always short meetings, always hushed words exchanged before she left abruptly. A pattern emerged. She was being watched, and perhaps she knew it. Who were these men? Associates? Enemies? Or colleagues from a hidden world, the shadow war of intelligence? The two unclaimed suitcases at Bergen Station became the most tantalizing evidence. Each item hinted at a life lived in deception. Wigs in multiple styles. Was she concealing herself from pursuers? Or preparing to become someone new at every stop? Her clothes were expensive, stylish, cosmopolitan. She was no drifter. She had money, access, and taste. Perfumes from luxury brands. A woman of sophistication, perhaps using scent as yet another disguise. But there were also sleeping pills, the same type found in her stomach. Were these for personal use, or part of a darker plan? The most important find, the coded notepad. Investigators cracked the system. Each symbol corresponded to hotel stays, travel dates, and locations. It was a diary of a spy, written not in words but in movement. Her life was a constant cycle of transit. Bergen was only her last stop. But what the suitcases did not contain was equally haunting. No identification, no photographs, no personal letters. She had scrubbed her life clean, leaving only tools of the trade. Whoever she was, she had planned to disappear. And yet, someone made sure she disappeared permanently. As the investigation grew stranger, theories spread like wildfire. The press named her the Isdal Woman, and speculation filled the front pages. Some believed she was a spy, caught in the Cold War crossfire. Norway, after all, was strategically vital, home to NATO bases and monitoring Soviet activity in the Arctic. A perfect place for espionage. Was she gathering intelligence, meeting contacts, or exchanging secrets in plain sight? Others dismiss a spy theory as sensationalism, suggesting she was simply a woman living a secret double life, perhaps an art dealer, perhaps involved in smuggling. Smuggling routes often mirrored espionage networks. Diamonds, contraband, documents, all moved through the same shadows. The police entertained every possibility, but with no family, no identity, no living witnesses, the truth seemed destined to vanish with her. And so the mystery deepened. Who was she really? A spy, a smuggler, or simply a woman running from herself? In death, she had become larger than life. As the police dug deeper, witnesses began to come forward. Ordinary Norwegians who had seen this mysterious woman in the days leading up to her death. Each account added a fragment to the puzzle, but none seemed to fit neatly with the others. One shopkeeper described her as elegant, almost aristocratic, with dark hair and sharp features. She purchased a men's cologne, seemingly out of place for her. When asked about her background, she gave evasive answers, her accent shifting between French and German. Another recalled seeing her hiking near Bergen, dressed in the wrong gear for the rugged terrain. He remembered her being followed by two well-dressed men. The memory haunted him. Was she being watched, or was she working with them? Descriptions varied. To some, she looked Southern European. To others, Eastern. Her clothes, sometimes chic and fashionable, at other times practical and masculine. She was a chameleon, changing skins with each encounter. The more people came forward, the less coherent the picture became. It was as if she had been deliberately crafting confusion, a human mirage. To understand why the Isdal Woman story was so haunting, we must remember the world of 1970. This was the height of the Cold War. Europe was divided, suspicion was currency, and spies moved like ghosts through its cities. Norway, though small, was not immune. With its strategic position near the Soviet Union and its hosting of NATO facilities, it was a hotbed for intelligence operations. Foreign agents often passed through Bergen, unnoticed by the ordinary citizens. Some investigators began to wonder, was the Isdal Woman one of them? A spy caught between rival networks, eliminated before she could betray secrets? The wigs, the false names, the coded notepad, all bore the hallmarks of espionage. Officially, the police never confirmed this, but in whispers, the theory grew. Perhaps too dangerous a truth for a small country to confront openly. If she was a spy, then who silenced her? The Soviets? NATO? Or perhaps her own side, once she became a liability? Digging into her aliases, police discovered that under one name, she had stayed in Oslo. Hotel staff remembered her vividly. She kept to herself, carried multiple heavy suitcases, and seemed constantly on edge. Under the name Fenella Lorch, she checked into a modest hotel. But unlike most guests, she spent hours sitting in her room in silence, as though waiting for something or someone. A waiter remembered her insistence on sitting with her back against the wall, facing the door. A small detail, but one common among those who lived in constant fear of being followed. Several witnesses hinted she was not always alone. A mysterious man was said to have joined her briefly on one occasion, the two exchanging only a few words before he vanished into the night. The staff never saw him again. Was she a courier, a messenger between hidden hands of the Cold War? Or were these chance encounters blown into myth by the fog of memory? Her paper trail stretched across borders, but the woman herself remained phantom. The deeper the investigators went, the stranger the case became. For every lead, two more contradictions emerged. Some officers began to feel they were dealing with something beyond their mandate, forces larger than a single woman's death. Why were there so many codes? Why so many aliases? The pieces felt less like a puzzle to be solved, and more like deliberate misdirection. Privately, some whispered their belief she had been a spy. But publicly, the official line remained cautious. Suicide. A narrative few truly believed, but one easier to file away. The government downplayed the affair. Perhaps they feared stirring panic, or perhaps the truth risked exposing sensitive intelligence. Some even claimed to feel they were being watched. Files went missing. Evidence misplaced. It was as though the case itself was being sabotaged from the shadows. The Isdal Woman was no longer just a mystery. She had become a specter, haunting not just a valley, but an entire nation. Officially, the case was closed. The Isdal Woman was buried in February 1971 in Bergen under a simple gravestone that read, "Here lies an unknown woman found dead in Isdal Valley. No family ever came forward. No relatives claimed her. Only the police and a handful of journalists stood by as she was lowered into the ground. A woman without a past, without a name. Yet even in death, she refused to be forgotten. Locals visited her grave, leaving flowers. A sense of unease lingered, that perhaps Bergen had been host to a secret larger than itself. For decades, her story lay dormant, overshadowed by other scandals of the Cold War. But the name Isdal Woman remained etched in the collective memory of Norway, a riddle with no solution. The file was closed, but the silence around her spoke louder than words. But time is a way of resurrecting old ghosts. Nearly 50 years after her death, new technology and fresh eyes would breathe life into the cold case. In 2016, Norwegian journalists reopened the mystery. They began digging through the original files, re-interviewing witnesses, and asking questions the police had long stopped asking. The notepad codes, once brushed aside, were re-examined. They revealed patterns of travel, dates, and destinations. Her movements weren't random. They formed the life of a courier, a shadow traveler across Europe's front lines. Then came the breakthrough. Forensic scientists exhumed her remains. With modern technology, they extracted DNA, searching for the roots of a woman who had no past. Her mitochondrial DNA suggested Southern European ancestry, possibly from around the Franco-German border. Isotopic testing of her teeth hinted she may have grown up in or near France or Germany during the war years. She was no ordinary tourist. She carried a history shaped by war, displacement, and secrets, a woman of Europe's fractured heartlands. The journalists asked a question that still lingers today. Was she a spy, or was she something far stranger? Half a century later, the Isdal Woman remains one of Europe's greatest unsolved mysteries. Every new clue opens more questions than it answers. DNA placed her in Western Europe, but no country has ever matched the profile to a missing person. Her aliases remain untraceable. Her supposed lovers, contacts, or handlers, faceless, silent. For the people of Bergen, she is more than just a cold case. She is a specter, a reminder that behind the ordinary streets and smiling faces, there are secrets we may never uncover. Some believe she was a spy, executed for knowing too much. Others whisper of organized crime, or even stranger theories, that she was an experiment, a pawn in games beyond ordinary imagination. All that remains are fragments, wigs, codes, and ashes. A story without a beginning or end, just a haunting middle. The Isdal Woman's identity may never be known, but her silence speaks volumes. It reminds us that in the Cold War, and perhaps even now, some truths are too dangerous to surface. And so she remains, a mystery buried in the valley of ice and shadows.